Hello everyone, I am still in Stockholm, Sweden, where it seems like I am the only person wearing a mask. And even with this terrible weather, it's a little cold, it started raining, people are still out, they are still shopping, they are still going to work. A lot of people are trying to work from home. The government has been recommending, not enforcing social distancing, but not everyone is doing it, and you can go to a restaurant, you can go to a bar. It's a different approach, it's a controversial approach, but officials here, health officials say it is sustainable because they're worried that we could be facing some sort of coronavirus threat for potentially years to come. So they didn't want to impose total lockdowns that they thought would collapse the economy, ruin the education system, and do too much damage to society.
Why is that approach controversial? I mean, you just heard that was an NBC correspondent describing what Sweden has done. We now have seen, because we can look at the spike in infections after a certain per capita level has been reached, and you've done this. You can do this with European countries, and you can do this lining up U.S. states, including the worst hit states. And Sweden, without doing, remember, the restaurants are not closed, bars are not closed, businesses are open, and people like to point out, oh, businesses are getting, they're not doing very well in Sweden. Though, yeah, no one's saying it's going to be perfect or a great economy, but it's better, isn't it? I mean, for those of you that operate a small business, if you were told that you could operate at lowered staffing, but you could make, 25, 30% of what you normally do, while the government figures out how it's going to still try to help businesses, and there's still a lot of things that can happen, wouldn't you take that opportunity? I mean, I know the answer is yes from people all across the country, but I do think that it's worth saying it out loud. But the objection to Sweden has been so fascinating to watch this, especially because we were told initially that they're going to learn a horrible lesson and Sweden is going to be a disaster. This is what we're going to be told. This is what we were led to believe all along, that Sweden was making a huge mistake because they weren't doing the all of the above lockdown approach. They didn't do it. And they didn't have a worse outcome than a lot of countries that did have an all of the above lockdown approach. And don't tell me this, but it got started sooner in other countries. Sweden has a large immigrant population, a lot of international flights. There's a lot of coming and going out of Sweden. There's not some reason to believe that these other European countries should have been so much worse off, and they were much worse off on a per capita basis, mind you. There's all these lazy comparisons that are made. Oh, the U.S. has the most cases of this compares it to European countries. All right, well, the U.S. also has 5 times the population of Italy. So why is it a worthwhile comparison to say we have more cases than Italy? Of course we do. Of course we have more cases. And also, how much testing have we done? And I want to talk more about the testing mantra soon. But for now, let's just understand that Sweden has been staying in what we would consider the phase 1, maybe, or phase 2 of a reopen here in America. And they have not had this terrible outcome that we were told they would. Once again, the experts, the consensus was incorrect. They can now talk about how, but Sweden, the society is healthier and they have less old people living with younger people. They can do all this other analysis. But at the end of the day, here's a country that is operating as though they're trying to go forward with life, even though there's this virus in the background. And their outcome in terms of deaths and infections was not markedly worse, and in fact was generally better than countries that said, everybody stay home, don't move, don't do anything. Why would we not take that as an important data point in this process? What explanation could there be that would explain why we should ignore that? Well, it's because there are a lot of people who think that they're very smart, who are also very scared and very worried about what would happen if governments were not treated like they were run by smarter, better people than the rest of us. And I'm talking about the media. I'm talking about the establishment, the power establishment in this country and many of our European counterparts. And they don't want to believe that it's possible. They don't want to believe that that there was any other approach here, that there was anything else that could have been done. and that maybe they were wrong. That's really what it comes down to. People really hate to be wrong. And this is one where I keep finding areas where I hope I'm wrong. You know, when I tell you that I think our vaccine, all these stories about new vaccines going into trials, okay, we'll find out if they work in about a year and a half. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope that there are much better, that the vaccines are much more effective and they come out much sooner than I'm anticipating. But there's also a very decent possibility that we might be dealing with coronavirus on a seasonal basis the way we deal with flu. You get a flu vaccine, guess what? You can still get the flu. It doesn't mean it's not worth getting the vaccine, and people who are older and at higher risk particularly get the flu vaccine. Others, it's a little more of an ad hoc basis. That's a sustainable path, though. That's something that we can handle, we can deal with. It seems very possible, maybe even probable at this point, that coronavirus will be somewhat similar to that. That we're going to end up having a variable year in, year out vaccine that tries to guess what the coronavirus that year will be. This is assuming it mutates. If it stays exactly the same, well, then maybe we've got a one shot and you're done. Although we don't have that for the common cold. And there are hundreds of cold strains out there, as you know. And we don't have that for the flu. So why we would have that? And I don't believe we have a SARS vaccine. So why exactly are we assuming that? Sweden is not taking the approach of, we only have to get to some point and then everything will be better. They're taking the approach of, we're going to just push forward. We're going to be smart. We're going to try to take care of people. But we're not going to do what all these other countries have convinced themselves they have to do. And it looks like Sweden was right. And we should be willing to admit that now, especially as we're reopening states. And oh my gosh, CNN, big headline, models claim deaths will rise. All these stories about what happens if you reopen too soon. If you reopen too soon, what's not too soon? When is it not too soon to reopen? They keep talking about testing as though that's an answer. It's really not an answer. It's something that they say because the alternative is the recognition that they just don't want to do it. They don't want to take the plunge. They don't want these states and they don't want the rest of America to be able to try and push forward even with the virus looming out there. And so they just keep saying, no, the testing has to be better, has to be higher. Let me walk you through some of what that really would mean. When they say the testing has to be better, how much better? How far away are we from what they say needs to happen? And is it even feasible? And is it something that comes with other costs too? Let's talk about testing. Look, it doesn't get any better than Jack Carr's Savage Son, which is the latest in the Terminal List series. This is a book that will bring you right into the heart of the action. I'm in the middle of it myself. You can listen to the audiobook, and right now you should download the audiobook for Savage Son. Look, Jack Carr explores the darkest instincts of humanity through the eyes of a man who's seen both the best and the worst of it. He's a former Navy SEAL, saw a lot of combat himself. So his hero, James Rees, is somebody that has all of those details, all of that true-to-life experience brought into the character. The audio edition of Jack Carr's Savage Son is available wherever audiobooks are sold. You can go on Amazon, wherever you like to get your audiobooks. Jack Carr's Savage Son should be the top of your list. It's the top of mine. It's read by Ray Porter, so the voiceover work is fantastic. The book is excellent. Download it today. Listen to Savage Son, the audiobook by Jack Carr, the latest in the Terminal List series. You'll be glad you checked it out today.
A month and a half ago when New Rochelle was quarantined, I called up the mayor. I said, what do you need? He said, if I had tests, I could solve this problem. Adequate tests for everybody. He said, if I give a test to everyone in New Rochelle, if they had the virus, they'd have to stay in. If not, they could go to work, go on the streets. Korea did it. Germany's doing it. Other countries are way ahead of us. And this administration clings to this idea that the states should do it with no plan as to how the states can do it, no rationale as to how the states can do it. It's awful. That's all you can say. It's awful. And Mr. President Donald Trump, you're hurting the recovery you want so badly by not having the tests. The best way to recover quickly is testing, testing, testing. And I want them to do the right thing. I want them to do the right thing for the American people. And it is frustrating.
You know what's frustrating? I keep hearing this, and I hear it from Nancy Pelosi, I hear it from Chuck Schumer, I hear it from other people who I know not to trust at all. And that's frustrating because their interests are not aligned with what's best for the country. Their interests are always political, explicitly political. Pelosi, Schumer, we know that. They don't rise above partisanship. They are partisanship. That's what they're all about. And I keep telling you that there's this repetition of the phrase testing as though somehow that's an answer. What would that really even mean? First, let's start with how close are we? Because this is going to be the complaint. Remember, initially, this was what they were using against the president until it became clear that it was really a problem with the CDC and then the FDA. The CDC, in the early stages of the pandemic, had a messed up test. That's on them. And the president's not. No one thinks the president's in there with a little lab coat on and a couple of beakers and, mixing things like a mad scientist coming up with the test. No. CDC had a messed up test. And the FDA, unnecessarily, because it's a large federal bureaucracy, and we understand how those things work or don't work, as the case may be, the FDA slowed down the private testing that could have been a real difference maker in the early stages of getting tests out there. There were plenty of labs that could handle it and labs that had come up with their own tests to do, but FDA was saying, we have to make sure every T is crossed, every I is dotted, even though there's a pandemic breaking out. So they had to back off that a little bit. You remember it was all, Trump didn't have the testing in place. And now we're hearing the same thing. Because this allows them to never have to make a tough decision, right? No, we just have to keep waiting until the testing is in place. There's no way we're going to wait till the testing is in place as they say it needs to be. It's never going to happen. It'll be months and months. Yeah, well, where am I basing this, or why am I coming to that conclusion? This was on CNN today, which of course is a chorus of lockdown forever because it's oppositional to Trump. Forget about what it means for the country. It's oppositional to Trump. Oh, and now they're in a position where being opposed to Trump also allows you to walk around feeling so good about yourself because you just care about protecting lives. You don't care about the massive losses to people's livelihoods, to the economy, to the lives that will be lost, to preventable disease, to the alcoholism, to the depression. All these, none of that factors into their analysis. You never hear them talking about it, but they care so much about lives, and they get to be opposed to Trump. Wow, it's a twofer. According to a Harvard study, this was on CNN today, the United States needs to be conducting 20 million tests per day to reopen the country completely. Right now, the country is conducting about 250,000 tests a day after several weeks during which testing remained at a frustratingly steady 150,000 per day. That means testing has to be increased by 80 times in order to meet the standards determined by researchers. Does anyone think that we're going to have an 80-fold increase in testing in the next month or two? 80 times more testing. This is what the CNN article is claiming that the Harvard researchers have come up with. That's the number. Okay, let's remember, I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't play one on radio or TV, but I'm just trying to work through this. I'm trying to think through the problem as a person who does want what's best for the country and wants us to make the smartest decisions we can. Here you go. 20 million tests a day. That's a good chunk of the U.S. population every day. There are 320 million people in the country, right? So we're talking about 20 million tests a day every day. How long do we keep that going? Think about the testing regimen that we're talking about here. 20 million tests a day. And at any given time, somebody could become infected a day or two later. So we all have to keep going. We're all going to get tested every 2 weeks for this disease that if you're under 50 has less than a 1 in 1,000 chance of killing you. We're going to do this? This is the answer. Remember, we don't know when therapeutics are happening. We don't know when vaccines are happening, but we can't reopen the country until we're doing 20 million tests a day. And let's say we get to the 20 million tests a day. Okay, that means that we'll have a better idea of who's infected. By the time somebody recognizes that they need to get a test, chances are they've already come into contact with people and may very well have infected a couple of them. Now we have personal mitigation measures in place here, but I mean, this seems to me like we're just delusional about what's possible here. 20 million tests a day, and then we're going to have tracing as well. Who's going to be doing all the tracing? So we're going to get a positive test. Remember, this is not like STD tracing, which they also can do, where they'll say, you know, well, who have you had sexual relations with? For, you know, most people, that's a pretty easy thing to remember. Who was everyone that went into an elevator after you did, perhaps a few hours later, walked past you in the aisle of a store, was in the office with you, or was in the home with you, or touched a button after you touched it? You know, in a building here in New York, we're always touching door handles and buttons that everyone else has to touch all the time. That's going to be the approach. They're going to track those people down and get them to be tested. Think of the government surveillance system that's going to be in place here too. I mean, it's just not realistic, folks. It's not going to happen. I mean, I can sit here and tell you, we're not going to start doing 20 million tests a day for this disease. 20 million tests a day when there are testing centers all over the country right now with no customers. There are tests set up in states. No one's going to take them. So who's going to be taking these 20 million tests a day? If you live in a county, I mentioned, Texas, a lot of states have whole counties with not. If you live in a county where they haven't had a single case of this disease, you have no symptoms, are you going to show up and take a COVID-19 test because the government says so? Well, maybe if you need to get your immunity passport or whatever they're going to call it, but now we're starting to head closer and closer to what feels like a turnkey totalitarianism. Why isn't anyone asking this question? Well, what is the testing regimen supposed to be like? And I know the experts keep saying this. The experts also don't know crap about the economy and are operating in this realm of, it's like they're telling 320 million people to act the way they would tell one person in their office to act. And we're just all going to, like, we're all one organism that's just going to do whatever we're told. No, false. The experts on this issue have been very disappointing. And we should be able to say that out loud. The people that were supposed to see this coming, that were supposed to tell us, give us early warning, know about this virus, understand this. They had warnings before with SARS and MERS, and they should have recognized that this was going to hit us at some point. And there should have been a whole lot more research. Don't even get me started on all the billions of dollars wasted on climate change lunacy, while this was growing in the background as a very real science-based, a threat that science could have been working to rectify or to at least minimize. No, instead we have this. We have this degree of complete and utter absurdity that now comes forward with, if you try to question what the experts tell you, and if you question that testing is the answer, it's like you're a bad person. Meanwhile, this just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make, and the fact that Chuck Schumer is using this as his main line of complaint, what else do you have to know? I mean, Schumer is an incredibly shifty, shady fellow. Schumer is not someone that we should be listening to on this or any other issue for that matter. And this is his go-to. Same thing with Nancy Pelosi. You think all of a sudden they've turned into experts who really listen to the science? No, clearly not. They're not people who should be trusted. They're not people we should be listening to on this. And the testing mantra has just become a way of avoiding making a tough call here about opening states. Oh, no, don't do it until because they can't say don't do it until the vaccine comes or till we have a therapeutic, because who knows when that's ever going to be. So now they've set this impossibly high bar with testing that we're never going to meet, at least not for the next 3. I mean, when I say never, yeah, maybe in 6 months. So we're going to stay locked down for 6 months, folks? Is that what they're saying? Because we're not going to be at 20 million tests a day in a month or two. It's not going to happen. So what do we make of that? See, that's the thing. I tell you the truth, and I do all the reading. I do all the homework beforehand. I show up here and I tell you the truth, even though all the really smart people out there just parrot each other and don't do their own thinking. I want to check in with what's going on inside the Beltway, down in the swamp. And I feel like our special unofficial swamp correspondent is our main man, Sagaar Enjeti, my former colleague down at the Hill. He is the host of Rising on Hill TV, which is a wonderful show, especially given that it has a fantastic pedigree that stretches now over some of the best young conservatives in the business. Mr. Sagaar Enjeti, great to have you on, sir.
Great to see you, Buck. Thanks for having me, man.
First off, and how is it? Just tell us, how's it going in the swamp these days in terms of the lockdown, and what's the feeling? We're trying to get a little bit of a sense of what it's like in different parts of the country. We had Congressman Andy Biggs on from Arizona. He was in Arizona right now, from Arizona. What he's seeing there. How are things going in D.C.?
D.C. is not. It's not like New York City at all. As in the kind of public feeling, the panic, all of that. Even widespread masks are not really in use, but everything still is shut down. There's no restaurants. People are being kicked out of public parks. There's not necessarily any real public life, but and from what I can tell, people are beginning to tire a little bit of the restrictions, because we're continuing to see that, things are getting pushed out, May 15th, now June 1st. And it's not, the coronavirus crisis here are growing a little bit, but it's not anywhere like New York City. I would say it's like a mid-range American city in terms of the effect, nothing out of control like Detroit, New Orleans, or New York.
So I wanted to get you on issues of politics of the day right now. And let's start, if we could, with a big endorsement coming for Joe Biden today from none other than Hillary.
Yeah, Buck, it could not be more perfect, right? Which is that Hillary Clinton is going to endorse Joe Biden at a virtual women's town hall as him and the media ignore this sexual assault allegation against him, right? The same people who ran buck wild with Julie Swetnick and, gang rape allegations, completely unsubstantiated and were obviously BS at the time to anybody with a hint of scrutiny, are now the ones who are celebrating Joe Biden, who are endorsing Joe Biden for president. On our show on Rising, I've literally gone back and played the clip of people like Kamala Harris. As recently as April 2019, she says she believes all of the women who said that Joe Biden made them feel uncomfortable whenever he was creepy. This was in April 2019. So exactly a year later, what changed? Well, what changed is she wants to be vice president. And what is it with Hillary Clinton? I guess at least she's consistent. She's spent her entire career kind of denigrating people accusing her husband and other people of sexual assault. So it's nothing particularly new for her, but it's just the hypocrisy that we see from these people. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Have you even heard someone in the media try to defend? And I really mean this. I know that there's been a lot of silence, but after Dean Baquet did his whole, Kavanaugh was a really public person in that interview, and everyone said, hold on a second, dude. The would-be presidential candidate for the Democrats is a pretty public story and person, and I think everyone was like, "Wow, that didn't even pass the laugh test." Have you seen anyone try to make the case that somehow there isn't a double standard?
No, there's just, only in that interview that you're talking about, Buck, where Ben Smith from the New York Times went to his boss and was like, "Hey, I'm looking at this line-by-line coverage of Julie Swetnick and this allegation, and weird, it just is different." That's the only time anybody's even addressed the double standard. Buck, Washington Post posts the story. We have a new development in the case, which is that the woman who's accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault, Tara Reid, a reporter, the same reporter who teamed up with Ronan Farrow to bring down Harvey Weinstein, he went and he found one of her neighbors who said, "Yeah, she told me about something like this back in 1995. And so, when that development arises, the Washington Post writes this headline: Trump allies seize on new developments, seize on new developments against Joe Biden. So the story is not whatever the new reporting is. It's that Trump allies. And I went and I read their stupid story. And down in the bottom, what does it say? Their Trump allies was Mitch McConnell mentioned it once, and Donald Trump Jr. retweeted a few tweets about the Tara Reid allegation. So that's how they get around it, right? They're like, conservatives pounce on some crazy thing that's being accused of Joe Biden. They can't just report straight up what the new development against Biden is. And by the way, the Times doesn't even address it. They're just not going to write about it. They decided.
And what are you hearing about because we had the Hillary endorsement today, which is fascinating because, remember, Hillary, usually you'd think that a vice president after 8 years of being vice president would be the natural pick for the Democratic Party. So it looks like, if I'm Joe Biden, I just would make sure, I don't know. Hillary, I feel like she's never really out of it. That's all I'm going to say. I think she plays very dirty. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying she plays very dirty, and I don't think she's ever really gives up that she should still be the nominee. But Biden should definitely keep washing his hands. But the reality here for the Biden campaign is they've also got a lot of pressure from, and I mean pressure from Stacey Abrams. I mean, Stacey Abrams kind of run around saying, you better make me your vice president. And everyone's kind of like, whoa, this is an interesting campaign.
You've never seen anything like it, have you, right, Buck? It's like this woman who was a state legislator. That's all she's ever done. Failed candidate for Georgia. Somehow conned a lot of people into giving her millions, I literally mean millions of dollars, for some fake nonprofit about protecting the vote, is now out there talking about how she's qualified to be the vice president because she's like, well, black women can only support like other black women and their issues need to be spoken to. And it's really weird because, if you look at the Democratic primary, that the black women candidate, Kamala Harris, would often get fourth or fifth amongst black voters. So, maybe that's not how African-American people vote, even in their own party. And Stacey Abrams had the gall, Buck, to go out there and say that she should be vice president because she's been, quote, in independent study of foreign policy for 20 years. I mean, independent studies, that means there are graduate students who are probably more qualified to be a vice president than Stacey Abrams.
Do you think that, you're in the swamp, although not a swamp creature. Sagaar is one of us, folks. He's one of the good ones.
True.
That's right.
Yeah.
But he is down in the swamp, technically. So what are you hearing about, who else is kind of rumored and or on the short list for the Biden VP slot, which I do think it's fair to believe that this vice presidential pick is important, not just because of the campaign, but also the very real prospect that Joe Biden's health will, over the next 8 years, if he were to win, deteriorate to the point where the vice president might have to step in. I think that's a realistic. But so who are the other candidates you're hearing? And do you have any sense as to who's the likeliest at this point?
So there's a big fight going on inside the Biden campaign right now. It's, do we pick Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams, or do we pick somebody like Elizabeth Warren, or do we pick Amy Klobuchar or Gretchen Whitmer? So the Warren case, they're like, well, Elizabeth Warren, you could give something to the progressive base of the party, but she doesn't really bring anything whenever it comes to electoral politics, and she couldn't even win her own home state. She's actually deeply unpopular in Massachusetts. They could do Stacey Abrams or Kamala Harris, right? That's an African-American woman. That's something they play a lot into the identity politics about how voters supposedly vote, even though that's not true. Or Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, she's the governor of Michigan. She's got a decent approval rating. And of course, Michigan, big battleground state, Trump only won it by something like 0.3% of the vote last time. And so they would be looking for a boost there. Plus, she's got executive experience. If I had to guess, Amy Klobuchar is kind of the underdog in all of this because, it's funny. I saw this from Chris Matthews. He emerged from his banishment in order to give some advice to Joe Biden. And he said, you can't pick somebody who's going to overshadow you politically. But you need to pick somebody who could probably do the job. And Amy Klobuchar, to the Biden campaign, it seems that she might qualify both of those things. But there's no leading contender right now, as far as I know.
And I'm just wondering, Sagaar, I've seen some stuff on Twitter. Are you kind of an anti-weed crusader? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I've never asked you. I've known you for years.
Yeah.
I've never asked you about this. This is a big shift, but we got Sagaar Enjeti here from The Hill. He's the rising co-host of The Hill, which is a fantastic show, obviously. But I'm just wondering, tell me a little bit about this. I'm just curious. We're all stuck in quarantine. Okay. Tell us why Sagaar hates weed.
Okay, marijuana, a lot of this comes down to this, which is that the greatest con in history is medical marijuana. And this is something I agree with Michael Bloomberg on right now, because so much of the pro-pop movement is all about oh my gosh, I need this marijuana because some kid on YouTube miraculously had his epilepsy cured because he ingested cannabis. Okay, maybe that's true in 1% of use cases. But that doesn't mean that pot should just be completely legal, widely available, and encouraged. I mean, the way I look at it, which is that if you legalize marijuana right now, the way it's working in Colorado, you got more pot shops than you have McDonald's stores. If you same thing in California, is we're just encouraging the use of this drug, which we know is bad effects on kids and IQ for people who are under the age of 25. We know that ingesting large amounts of THC, which all marijuana is these days, right? Like, it's not just like a simple drug. This is a very high potency drug, which will put you down for quite a long time, because they keep medically and scientifically trying to engineer it to become even more potent. You're basically trying to empower a new big tobacco. And so, look, like, everyone's like, oh, well, do you care about alcohol? Yeah, I care about alcohol too. But alcohol is also, you know, part of Western civilization for the last 10,000 years. And we don't have a bunch of people walking around talking about how alcohol is the next miracle drug. So I just think a lot of, like, the pot lobby is just, it's a con. I mean, I think drugs are bad, and we should recognize that. And we shouldn't let a bunch of people gaslight us into thinking that, like, look, yeah, there's legitimate criminal justice concerns, even though that is some overblown, but that doesn't mean you have to, like, encourage people to use this drug. If you look at Colorado right now, like, 1 in 5 pregnant women are using marijuana. Like, I don't think that's good for a developing baby's brain. And the Surgeon General and a lot of other medical professionals agree with me. So it's, for me, it's more about, like, the discussion on this whole thing is skewed, which is that it's not just like legalize or not legalize. It's like, it's about use. It's about whether this thing is safe. And there's a whole lot of money behind trying to push the idea that this thing is completely safe, even for, like, kids to use, when that's just couldn't be farther from the truth.
All right. That was fun, Sagaar. I never got to ask you that before. I know some people come at you because you're like an anti-weed guy on Twitter, and they're like, "Oh, is it worse than weed, Sagaar?" You're like, "Yes."
Yes, actually, yes. It is.
There you go.
Right.
Sagaar Enjeti of the Hill, guys. Check out.
Giving me a platform.
What's up?
Thank you for giving me a platform, because nobody wants to touch this one.
Dude, anytime. We'll have you back. We'll do a long-form sit-down with you at some point. We'll talk about all these things. Sagaar Enjeti, check out their YouTube channel for Rising on, well, the YouTube channel is where you find it, and it's Rising on the Hill. Sagaar, right, man, thanks so much. Good luck to you. Give Crystal a big high five. No contact, right? Not allowed. No contact anywhere anymore. But give her
no contact. Elbow bump.
Give her, yeah, exactly. Give her an elbow bump from me, and tell the team down there I said regards. We'll talk to you soon.
I will. We miss you, man. Thank you.
If an American president loses more Americans over the course of 6 weeks than died in the entirety of the Vietnam War, does he deserve to be reelected?
So, yeah, we've lost a lot of people, but if you look at what original projections were, 2.2 million, we're probably heading to 60,000, 70,000. It's far too many. One person is too many for this. And I think we've made a lot of really good decisions. The big decision was closing the border or doing the ban. People coming in from China, obviously, other than American citizens, which had to come in.
Think of that question for a moment. He's asked, should a president win if that president loses more Americans in 6 weeks than died in the entirety of the Vietnam War? I mean, what a great DNC talking point attack on President Trump from somebody who was a, quote, journalist. Now, the president responded, I must say, very in a very, reasonable fashion to this. I would not have been nearly so willing to take that and accept the accept what was offered up there the way that he did. I would have said, what? But, I think that with Trump sometimes you never know. He keeps the enemy off balance. You never know what he's going to give them, what they're going to come up with. But remember that the other countries around the world that have been dealing with this too, they've also had terrible death tolls. Look, there are some things that are beyond the control of any government to handle or to prevent or to cure. And I think if you just look at what's happened in nursing homes, old folks' homes, assisted living care facilities, whatever the appropriate or preferred term may be, and how that's the single place where you would think there'd be the greatest focus outside of actual hospitals to prevent the spread of this because of the risk to the people inside. And no matter what the country is, when you look at all of the death data so far, assisted living facilities have been terribly hit by this. In some cases, I think in Sweden, 50% of the deaths are in assisted living facilities. In New York, I think it's pretty close to that, meaning the people that died. When I say I should say people that were infected in an assisted living facility and then either died in that facility or in the hospital after contracting it at the facility. But this just shows you, I mean, all the data tells us that people that are in that circumstance are at a very high risk and are particularly vulnerable, and we have not been able to protect them. We have not been able to do what is necessary to protect those folks. So, blaming the government at some level, you wonder, well, what would be considered a great response? What large country has had a great response to this? For a while, it seemed like the media was willing to go with Trump didn't do as well as China did on this. And then people started to say, well, if you're going to force people at gunpoint to stay in their homes and force people to die alone in their homes in what is a true house arrest situation, right? They lock you in your home and you're not allowed to leave your home on pain of God knows what the Chinese Communist Party will do to you. I think the media moved away from that one a little bit, but they still are so invested in creating this narrative that Trump has been completely ineffective in this, done all the wrong things. And I don't think that's fair. And that's putting it mildly. I think it's inaccurate. I think there have been mistakes, but everybody was making mistakes. I mean, heck, I spent days beating myself up saying, how could I not have seen how bad this was going to hit the United States, how badly it was going to hit the U.S., and also what it was going to do to our economy. But, this is why I always tell you, nobody can predict the future. People can identify trends. They can be smart analysts of what's out there, but nobody can predict the future. And that includes health experts and politicians when a pandemic is looming.